Hello, everybody, and welcome back. We're here for episode 3 of Ben's Open Tabs, a series where we basically get to explore a lot of different things regarding the intersection of the fields that I spend a lot of time thinking about and work in. So that would be kind of the intersection of tech. You have productivity, and then also some psychology as well. And so as we just kind of go through and just explore different ways of using technology in a way that allows us to solve different problems, but in a way that's actually impactful. And so, for those who have followed in the past, again, I've done usually dedicated streams on different topics, but over time found that there's just so much intersection and overlap between them that it became hard to sort of dedicate an entire session just to one particular topic. So instead, what this series was created to kind of allow us to kind of freely navigate it, just like, your browsers, you have a bunch of open tabs. That's kind of what this session is. We get to talk about different topics as they become relevant, and then in situations that are basically practical and hopefully make sense as far as the things that, you're building. So once again, for those who are new to the stream, my name is Ben Hong. I'm a open source contributor, Vue core team, Angular team, Nuxt ambassador. Love the web. Been a child of the web for many, many years, and have just loved building things with tech and just kind of exploring its ability to solve different problems for the people around and for the communities that I help to serve. So with that said, what is this particular session about? So last week we started exploring the concept of a food management app and really starting to look at the intersection of software development, AI, and sort of like how that all intersects, right? Because, in the world we live in right now, a bunch of people are talking about one-shotting apps and those kind of things. And I thought one of the best ways to kind of talk about that would be to actually explore building an actual project rather than merely sort of talking about it at a sort of theoretical academic level. And so last week we kind of explored sort of some requirements gathering, some of the things we were building with it. And so while that was a fun exploration into that, what I wanted to do is also then deep dive on a feature in Obsidian that I've been talking about for some time, but haven't gotten to do like a full session on, which I think is completely relevant given our situation. And that is on the topic of Obsidian Bases and how that feature works. And more importantly, how that might actually be helpful as far as the problem we're solving and how far we can actually take it without any custom development. And so that's what this particular session is all about. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump right in. All right. So first things first, what is Obsidian Bases? Obsidian Bases is Obsidian's answer to the whole question of like, well, I love using Notion and I love the concept of like databases and being able to store things in a way that I can modify them in tables and like query data and all that stuff. And Obsidian Bases is basically the response to that huge feature request that a lot of people have when it came to comparing note-taking apps like Obsidian and Notion, which are probably two of the more viral ones that often go talked about on different news different social media platforms and such. And so, all right. So with that said, so in its absolute simplicity, though, Obsidian Bases basically lets you take a collection of notes and format them in a way that lets you see different views and sort them in a way that's usable to you. And so the predecessor to this, which some of you may have, for those who have been using Obsidian for a while, is you might be familiar with Obsidian Data View. And so this was a plugin that was huge for its time because prior to Obsidian Bases, this was basically the only way for you to actually query notes, and it did a phenomenal job. And so you can see here's an example of how it would work. It basically turns your Vault into a database, right? Which is like, again, this is pre-bases. And you would write a query, something like this, where you would have like triple backticks, data view, and you would write things like what kind of view, like the view you were looking at, essentially like how you wanted the data to be formatted, and basic things like what columns there were. So you can hear like time played, length rating, and these are properties that you would include inside of your notes. Then from there, you would kind of write like basically SQL-like queries. For those who don't know what SQL is, just basically ways for you to describe to the plugin how you wanted the data to be arranged. And so it's just it was fairly like not as programmy as you would expect, right? Because again, most of this is fairly declarative as far as in plain English goes, right? Because for example, you want a table that has the time played, the length, the rating, and where are you getting all your data from. It would be at the in this particular case, if I remember correctly, this was the folder it would be. So if you stored all your notes in a games folder, for example, it would query those notes specifically. And then you would be, okay, how do I want to sort it? I want to sort it by the rating and in descending order, or ascending. It's like one of the two. So that was like basically how this query worked. And it worked gangbusters, and people used it for a long time, really loved it. But there were certainly limitations with it, because once you got this rendered view, to be honest, even though this is not my actual vault, this is actually not much further than the functionality that you were provided. In other words, outside of clicking on these links, which would actually take you to the notes, which you would most likely expect, everything else was essentially static. You could not come inside of here if you were like, oh, you know what? Actually, I'm going to update, let's see, what game in here? Let's see, Ori and the Blind Forest, right? And instead of 8.5, I'm upping that to a 9.5 because I just finished my playthrough and I really, really loved it, for example. That would not be possible. Instead, what you'd have to open the note, and then you have to go inside and change the property itself. And while at the onset, that doesn't sound like a ton of work up front, it did lead to a bit of user friction, because you can imagine, especially as you're looking through this, if you want to change the properties for multiple rows, although it wouldn't totally make sense in this particular example we have right here, it was rather tricky to do, because then you'd have to open 3 separate notes, edit it simultaneously. And a lot of times when you want to modify data like this, you really want to just be able to modify it inline like you would an Excel spreadsheet. And so with that said, that kind of brings us to this moment of, let's see. Hello, dude, man. How's it going? Spaces in the sideboard that change with the current note are amazing. Yeah. Way data view is so great. Powered my to-do list for many years. Yo, what's up, Jacob? Yeah. Again, data view, fantastic. It did a fantastic job. As of, at least according to this, assuming this is actually updated. Yeah, Blacksmith Goo. I don't think he's been working on this as much recently. The last release truly was in 2025. And so the general sentiment among the Obsidian community as far as Obsidian Bases, as data view, is that it has essentially been sunset for use, because Obsidian Bases has sort of taken over as like its successor. And so, we'll be covering over that, like sort of working on a base together from scratch. And so, yeah. Cool. Okay, so bringing this all back. So in context of the food management app that we were starting to build last week and sort of exploring this concept. So the thing about bases, which I guess to recap, So to recap, the food management app that I'm looking to build in my mind was like, it would be local first, so that you would own all the data. So you wouldn't have to worry about any proprietary format. So it would certainly be markdown using these sort of standard specs that people are already familiar with. And as a result, it would be able to be something you could modify easily within, say, Obsidian, but then also theoretically even give access to like the AI tool in that particular case. And so the reason why I wanted to explore Obsidian Bases as like sort of the first real exploration of it is that, like, there's this kind of quintessential saying that goes within the software development world that when it comes to building something, the running joke is sort of like, well, can you just do that with a spreadsheet? Because software engineers have a tendency to we like to, I'll say, romanticize the workflow process of building solutions. And when a lot of times like a spreadsheet could do that just as easily. Although granted, for those who are either newer to the software industry or whatnot, or if you're looking to create your own products, I would not let that be discouraging, because there are times where truly like a lot of things you're like, yeah, of course I could do that with just a spreadsheet. But there are certainly things to be said about the user experience and stuff that should always be considered, and why you don't want to just do everything in a spreadsheet. I mean, for instance, Jacob here is talking about a to-do list. Like 100% a to-do list could be done in a spreadsheet, right? There's nothing stopping someone from creating a column that has like a different states for it's like to do, in review, in progress, done kind of thing. Nothing's stopping anyone from doing that. But as we all know, as workflows get more complex, a lot of times we do want to be able to enhance that, do different interactions, and spreadsheets certainly have a limitation on that. So again, kind of a cheeky, I think it's called tongue-in-cheek kind of statement. But that said, there's something to say. There are merits to that idea, right? And so as an exploration of that, I figure since I hadn't had a chance to really talk about Obsidian Bases up until this point, this would be a great time to be like, hey, look, I have this food management app, but Obsidian is also already wonderful as it is. It works local first. So everything's marked down, and then it has kind of its own extension ecosystem too, so that if we really wanted to, we could even create like a plugin. And so the question became, well, how far can we really get with this food management app if we merely did it with Obsidian? And so, yeah, so that's kind of like the inspiration behind that and what we'll be kind of looking into. Okay, with that, I think we've done enough setup context and we've explored it. Let's jump right in, shall we? All right, so let me pull up my Obsidian. Boop. All right, so let me make sure the size is good. All right, we're good. So the first place I wanted to start is a recipe dashboard that I started long time ago. In fact, I can tell you when I started it. At least according, let me see. Can I do better than this as far as properties go? Information, can I do last, oh, whoops, what's this? All right, let's see, last modified, nope, that's not what I wanted to. I wanted to see if I could get the files last modified property on here, but it looks like that is not an option. So, okay, at the bare minimum, the last time this was updated according to the front matter I had stored, again, one of the reasons why I like doing this in my notes personally, this was created way back in 2023, May. So over 3 years, I've been sort of trying to, I've been thinking about this kind of idea. And so you can see actually this is here, I think it's actually a great starting point for having this discussion, because as we can see here, what we ultimately have is we have a more or less plain note. And so let me do the raw form for real quick. Here you can see, so there's some front matter up here that has like uses the Obsidian properties. And then this was back when they didn't, I believe like the file name wasn't actually being rendered always. And so I had like a separate H1 here. Here you see that I have some manual recipes that I had either been looking at, kind of bookmarking. And then it's just, it's kind of sloppy because I just sort of copied and pasted in anything that I was kind of interested in. And then funny enough, hey, look at what we have right here. We actually have this data view block which is what I mentioned earlier. So again, none of this is contrived. This is 100% the real recipes dashboard. I decided not to do any modifications to it prior to the stream because I figured this was a better way to sort of talk about this. And so in case for those wondering what exactly, so here is the data view rendered. And so as you can see here, what I did is I just wanted a list of all the different, I believe it's recipes, right? If I look at it. Yeah. So here I just wanted a list. I wanted all of them that had a tag type recipes. And I just wanted to avoid any of the templates that I have that already have been tagged recipes because that wouldn't be very useful in that particular view. And so just to be clear, if I switch this to table, for example, you'll see here that it will, let me see. Okay, there's the file. Let me do like, I was like file dot last, I want to say modified. I could be wrong about this. We're about to find out. Yeah, it was the wrong property. Can I do, okay, actually I can do the, it's fine. I can show it. So now if I did UUID, for example, so I think I have that on all my notes. Yeah, you can see that it would just render all that stuff in the table. But again, you can see here that if I want to change any of these IDs, it was basically impossible. So with that, that here is our data view. And then for those wondering what this bottom part is, this additional metadata, this was actually a little, I'll call it a hack more than anything else. It was basically prior to Obsidian front matter being really a thing where you had properties up here that you could like organize and store. I thought I had this idea that, well, since that wasn't an easy thing to really do at the time, I wanted all these different properties, and I was experimenting with like how to do it in a way that wouldn't like obscure all your content, because at one point I think I had like a bunch of properties up here and it felt like I had to scroll a lot to get to the properties. And so the additional metadata was for me to store basically attributes on the bottom of the node without actually interfering with the top. But it's not really relevant anymore, so that's gone. So that said, let's go ahead and start the modernization process for Obsidian Bases. Okay, so first thing first. So I'm a big fan of the command palette. So for me, that's Command P. And we're just going to create a new base here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create, oh, interesting. That actually open the hotkey. Okay, great. Create a brand new base, and I'm actually going to open this one to the side, and we're just going to open that recipe dashboard on the left again, just so that we have that comparison, although it flipped it, unfortunately. So hang on a sec. Let me, oh, that's interesting. Let me switch, and then it was like untitled.base. Okay, here we go. So now we have all this stuff here on the left, and then I'm going to go ahead and rename this recipes dashboard v2 so that we just have a clear distinction between the two. And so first thing first, you'll notice that right here, I have a bunch of stuff here regarding, you have some text, have a bunch of notes. And the first thing that Obsidian Bases does compared to data view is that it already has all your notes basically being revealed inside of your vault. So everything's up here. And so rather than having to query it, you basically start with everything and then you start filtering it down. So if we wanted to replicate kind of what we have here from data view, what we would do is we would create a filter and we would have, and so what you see here is that we have this whole user interface, this whole, all these like controls and stuff that makes it actually a lot more easier to understand. So we have files and we want to make sure the files have the tag and then type recipe. And then boom, already you can see here, look at this. It is already far, like we already see just with that, we've had the filter. It already looks pretty good right here. And then on top of that, we're going to do this a little bit better though. We have to match it completely. And I think I saw a template hiding somewhere in here. Yeah, see recipe page template right here. So we're going to add one more thing and we're going to add another filter. So where and file is not in folder. And then this is where I can do templates. And there you go. Now everything is hidden. Okay, this is great. And so you might be thinking, oh, well, that's pretty great. Oh, okay. Doodman here is also making a call out as well that we can put properties inside of the dashboard, the sidebar. And so that I believe is being done. So let me see if I open this Velvet Chicken here, you'll see that it's right over here in the left. And then I think actually to Doodman's point, because earlier I had mentioned regarding the lengthy. So if we just added a bunch of like dates, topics, stream type, like, these are not all relevant, but you see that to kind of show what I was saying, it gets long, like your front matter here on the left. And so you can see here my ingredients now is like popping really low. I believe you can actually change where the front, whether or not the front matter appears. Let me see, appearance, show ribbon. You know what, before I do anything, let me see if I can just find the front matter. How about properties? Yeah, show all, clear, toggle, fold properties. Okay, this is interesting. This might be a theme thing that I have limited actually, but here you can see now, this is actually a great example of how the properties have been completely hidden now. So you can add a bunch of stuff and not have it actually interfere with your actual navigation of the notes. The only thing though I noticed though is that now this is making me think a little bit, because I'm wondering why is there such, okay, this is a collapsed container. So my guess is this has something to do with the, because yeah, I think if I did margin bottom 0, yeah, so there's something happening here with the properties being folded in. And so now if I, like, for example, if I came in here and I did toggle fold properties, yeah, it would unfold back out. So okay, so I have like a shortcut for it, but it makes me wonder whether I should be updating the theme to accommodate for that. But yeah, so this completely eliminates this whole additional recipe metadata that I was concerned about. And so that's like a fun little tip. And so also to Doodman's point on the sidebar, you can actually access it via the file properties. And that's something you could always add back in if you don't have that already. Again, I don't have that memorized off the top of my head. So again, something you can always explore if that's something you want to do. And that way you can just manage it entirely here. So good call out, Doodman. Okay, so that's that. Okay, so a couple of things. We have here... Okay, so we've now replicated our entire data view. And so the next thing I want to show then is that bases are not just these dashboards, because if you notice, recipes dashboards v2 as a base is really its own separate file. So right now, if we open up the recipes dashboard, you'll see that now there is a recipes dashboard like regular file. So that's assumed, they don't show this in they don't show this in Obsidian directly, but the extension here is always assumed to .md, which is for Markdown. But you'll notice here is that v2 is considered a .base, which we'll explore kind of, I figure it'd be fun to show at the very end. And so while that is not technically a Markdown file, we'll see that later on it's a lot less complicated than you probably think. So that said, in case you're thinking, okay, well, that's cool, I have this base here, but like, what if I want descriptions? And for instance, like one of the things about here that we have inside of this recipes is that, especially sometimes when you're capturing information, in as part of your notes workflow, you find that you're not necessarily ready to always organize it a certain way and spend time investing in classifying it, etc. And so the question boils down to like, well, I just want to be like, for example, like this really is like, really all this is like a notes section for me, right? It's like things that I had at one point been interested in, and I want to like kind of take a look at, but not sure I wanted to really integrate inside of my vault. And so, however, you're like, okay, well, but that being said, I would like to have like my like inventory, right? So if we call like, I think that we call this like a filing cabinet, and this is like, like all like my recipes, for example, we can actually do this. So what we can do is, let me see, we'll do command insert base. Oh, this is insert new base. And so rather than that, we're actually going to do the embedding. So what we're going to do here is we're going to call the recipes dashboard v2 base, right? And this is just a simple link. But then we're going to leverage the syntax from Markdown, which is to embed it. Actually, I say Markdown, but this might be Obsidian thing, so don't quote me on that. But basically, we put an exclamation point here, and you're going to notice that right here, boom, we have our entire embedded view right here. And what's cool about this is that if we go in and add a property here, so again, this is what's really great about this, because remember earlier I mentioned that like I was trying to figure out like last modified time, for example, and I just couldn't remember the syntax. That was one of the trickiest parts about working with data view, was that you had to look up all the different properties. But here with the bases, they make it just absolutely seamless. And so here what we can do is, for example, we can see, okay, when was it created, right? For example, and then it's like, boom, the entire thing is populated, which is fantastic. And so here we can even do things like we can sort it, right? Just as you would expect in a normal table. So you can see here that the newest one I created recently was like a Korean potato salad recipe. And then the oldest one apparently did, well, that's actually kind of funny that the created time in this part. Oh, wait, did it? Hold on. There we go. For a second, I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Why is 2024 like the earliest one? No, it shifted between ascending, descending, and then like blanking out the sort entirely. And so you can see here, my oldest one looks like I made a tofu edamame stir fry thing in 2021. And so also, actually, you'll notice here that, interestingly enough, just by clicking it, it actually already created a property within our sort, which is another property within Obsidian Bases. And that is its ability to basically design and create different views. Let's see. I have only one thing I use data view for. I use it to list inline fields from my daily notes. Bases operating at the per note level doesn't expose that at that granularity. Yeah, so Duman, you completely hit on one of those things. And so as a quick side note for those who are data view users, as like a comparison of like before and now, like why you might still use data view, I think Duman here brings up an excellent point here. And that is that data view is particularly good at some of like the more programmatic inline calculations bit. And so an example of this, actually, I talk about this, but let's see, data view inline calculations, Obsidian, just to make sure we get the right thing. And so for example, here is someone, yeah, I think this is a pretty good one. Actually, if I could, I probably would prefer the docs for it instead. Is there a dark mode for this? No dark mode. Okay. So inline DQL. Okay. So here is an example here. Let me see. It looks like it might be a smidge small on the stream. And where you can actually then say, hey, look, in my note, I want you to dynamically check like and compute like this date until exams. And so it was good at these sort of dynamic programmatic functions. And you could, do things like, again, you can see here, it's when things are due. Although inline data view JS, let's see, dv.current time, inline JS queries. Yeah, current modified times. And so when you wanted to do little programmatic snippets inside of your notes, as far as I'm aware thus far, because I actually did try to do some of this research before the stream, Obsidian Bases has not gotten to that level of note granularity. And so to sort of qualify what I mentioned earlier regarding data view JS, while I mentioned it being sort of sunset as the official way or like the recommended way that most people are using to query notes and that kind of thing from like a database perspective, data view still has a very powerful functionality from this perspective, where if you're the kind of person who wants to get into the nitty-gritty of like customizing how different aspects of your notes are working and having it dynamically update based on different variables, to be clear, that does require digging into some of this more like programming type language. So essentially some JavaScript or at least programming language type syntax. And so in those particular cases, this is where DataView.js still has a lot of value in that particular regard. So great shout out, Dudeman, on that clarification. I was trying to think of, it was funny. Those are when I was thinking about the different ways that data view and like if there's any, like if I could really say you could completely sunset it, this was one of the things that actually had come to mind. And so just to have you bring that up just kind of validated that idea to me. So appreciate you mentioning that. Okay. So hopping back into Obsidian Bases. So as we can see here, we not only have the ability now to sort, right? Since we're talking about sorting, let's go ahead and dive straight into that. So, okay, right now I have two different dashboards right now, but there's really no point in that. So I'm going to go ahead for now. I'm just going to close the other one. And let me bump my Obsidian a little bit bigger so that people can see. Okay, fantastic. So I mentioned here that we can sort, right? And so sort is great because you can sort by multiple properties. And so I know that for a lot of people, if depending on your level of experience with data manipulation, you might not know that when it comes to sorting stuff, a lot of times we think about it from a singular perspective. So for example, I want to sort by like the file name. I want to go by alphabetical order, or I want to sort by created time. But one of the more powerful ways, especially when you're creating certain views of how your data is that you can actually sort by multiple views. In other words, you can do it in a way that says, hey, look, first I want you to go ahead and sort like by the created time. Then after that, I want you to sort by file name. And so this way that you can actually get a little bit of a grouping hierarchy or sorting hierarchy as far as your different properties. And so that's something that it does really well. You can see here, it's easy to rearrange it as well. And so they've, again, unsurprisingly from the Obsidian team, phenomenal job with this. It feels really intuitive. It gives me that Notion-like feeling that I once had when I remember when I first used Notion databases. It was this like, oh, why hasn't it always been like this? And so I hope as we walk through some of the other features that Obsidian Bases has, you'll have some of those moments of like, wait, so I get this kind of magic and like, intuitive functionality without in Obsidian, like natively core plugin, like no customization needed. Yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about in this session. Okay, so we talked about sort by, and this is fine. So again, at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and just leave it by sorted by alphabetical order at this point. Although I say that, and now that I think of, yeah, that's fine. Alphabetical order is totally fine. Okay, sort. The other thing that we want to mention by is that you can actually group it by a certain thing. And so this I actually found is fantastic because I remember when working with DataView, the group by syntax was it worked, but at the same time it was one of those things where like there were times I would mess up the syntax and I would expect it to look a certain way or whatever. And so what's nice about this is that we could actually group it based on different categories. And so in this particular case, I'm trying to remember, I don't think I got too far as like the schema. And so this is another one of those things too that I actually like a lot about Obsidian Bases for when we're thinking about from a programmatic perspective and thinking about data management, is that it gets you starting to think of data schemas in a way that like how they might be queried, how things might make sense to be organized. And so in this particular case, I'm actually going to create a thing called like recipe categories. And I say categories because things can be more than one thing. And so in this case, we're going to choose a list property. And so air fried broccoli for in this particular instance, let's just call it like, we'll just say vegetables, and we'll also call this like an appetizer. And then might as well, let's call it a side dish, for example. So great, we have that. And then let's do this salmon recipe as well. And let's give this recipe categories. This will be entrees. This will be seafood. We can even, let's label pescatarian, although that might go in like a diet category in the future. And then otherwise, I think, yeah, we can group it like that, for example. And then we'll just do one more for the sake of, let's see. So let's see. Let me do something that's a little bit, okay, here, caramel clay potfish, right? We'll do another recipe categories. Once again, this is pescatarian. We can say this is an entree, and then seafood, and yeah, let's just call it that. Okay, so we've now categorized 3 different recipes that I already have. And what we can do now is we can actually group by this thing called recipe categories. And so when I click on it, you're going to notice here that it's actually kind of interesting. It has the ability to group things in a way that, that is really interesting. Again, this is the fun thing about playing with things live sometimes, is that you'll notice that it doesn't necessarily group A to Z. Yeah. So for example, it doesn't know to like say all the entrees grouped together and all the pets. So okay, this is probably closer to what I was originally intending to demonstrate, but this is an interesting outcome of this, is that it's literally grouping by the exact same order. So for example, in the event, let's say, oh, this is going to be completely wrong. To be very clear, we're going to take this chocolate protein shake, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to say it's a recipe categories, and we're going to call it a vegetables. We're going to say side dish, and then we're going to say appetizer. So I'm going to reorder it real quick because I'm kind of curious what happens. And yes, based on my findings, you can see here that it is actually quite literal as far as its grouping. So despite the fact that these things are matching, they're all three the same thing, the order actually changes the way it's organized, which theoretically means then, in this case, let's say recipe meal, for example. And so this one, oh, see, I don't even, this is, oh, I will say this is where it's kind of interesting. I'm not sure how I would solve for this just yet, but let's just say for now, we'll just say recipe meal because this will actually illustrate what I was hoping to kind of show the first time. So imagine if, for example, for protein shakes, again, we'll call this like a snack. We won't call this a meal. And then we'll go ahead, let's see, open this to the right. And so we'll say recipe meal. And so the air fried broccoli, again, we're just going to consider this an appetizer, so we're taking this out. And then this one, we're going to go ahead and give this a recipe meal. And let's say this is dinner. And then we'll do this one again as well for recipe meal. And we'll just say, in this case, this one's dinner. And so we'll keep this a little bit simpler. Now, when we do the group by, you'll see that if we do recipe meal, and oh, by the way, I always shout out to the team and to anyone who designs software. Again, anytime you're working with a long list of things that are properties, like settings, like I think settings is the one I get the most frustrated about when it comes to software. I am of a very strong opinion, and people can show me the data. Otherwise, I'm happy to change my opinion on this, that people do not remember like the naming of things. And so giving them the ability to search rather than scroll through and find the exact thing they're looking for, fantastic job. I think it needs to be much more universal, especially with things like settings and when you're configuring things. It's just too many things to think about, and too many, like, it's so easy to have a typo or to use a term that's not familiar with. Again, for those who know, I'm a big fan of aliases. I do think it needs to be a much bigger part of software development, because that is, to me, a part of good user experience design. Is I can't tell you the number of times where I think it was like either on my phone or my computer, I'm looking to change the background or whatever, and I decided I'd use like screensaver. Oh no, screensaver is not the wrong term, but like I would either use background, but then it was in display. It's crazy. There are a bunch of different ways to describe the functionality that it is I'm trying to change, but because I think when they're designing the functionality, they're literally thinking, oh, well, the IA we establish is this, so therefore memorize it like this. And I just think, programmatically speaking, we can have aliases, and that is my random rant about aliases in the moment. But yeah, moving on. Okay, so actually, I clicked on recipe meal, and I thought there was, and so you'll see here that the changes already happened. And so what's cool here is that, boom, we have the ability now to group our different recipes based on the category that it's in, and it's done with a simple dropdown. And so what's cool about this then is also, you're probably thinking like, okay, this is cool, but like, if that does that mean that, actually, wait, I'm going to rewind that real quick. Because before I move on to that, because that's going to start getting us into a whole different topic of conversation as well. So we've talking about sort, we've talking about filters at this point. And so to be clear, again, filters can get complicated. I don't want to do like a full deep dive on this particular one, because I'm going to assume that most people who are using this kind of thing can actually understand like what it means to have like a filter group where some of these things are true and then some of these things are not true. Like that gets into a whole like logic tree of like what's true, what's not. And so again, separate discussion. But what I do want to call out though is that there is this concept of all views versus this view when it comes to the filter functionality. And that means that in this particular view, which we'll talk about in a little bit, it means that you can actually limit your filters down or make them global based on the view you're looking at. And that is probably lead into what we'll be talking about shortly. But I did want to clarify that in filters, you actually can distinguish between global ones versus individual ones. The other one that you kind of saw me do very briefly is properties. And so similarly, this contains all basically the various properties that exist for the files that it has queried, and will To be honest, I actually think it's even gone above and beyond because I'm not sure some of these things, like I see stream type. I don't believe. Oh, wait a second. Now that I'm thinking about it, does anyone have this property? I think I accidentally added it on one. Was it this one? No, it was the Asian salmon one. Nope, not that either. Not that either. Okay, so actually, oh, you know what? Here's the thing. This is a great way of actually, we're gonna test this right now. So in this particular view, I want to look for a file that has the property of a stream type. So it does. So again, so this here practical example of when you're trying to drill down for a note and figure out a note that has a specific thing to filter for it. In the past, you had to do a lot more weird search queries and that kind of stuff. Bases, phenomenal way to kind of drill down. And so this will, because I was like, who the heck has a stream type property? So first of all, I'm going to uncheck this real quick, and then I'm going to come inside of here, and then I'm going to unfold all these properties. And this time we're going to go ahead and remove this stream type because again, not relevant at all. And so what I was curious about then is that now that all this, first of all, the properties here are now, you can see here actually, these are all just standard Obsidian properties. File name, created time, all this stuff. This is built in, nothing for you to customize. However, once we take away the filter for stream type, you'll notice here we get all our recipes back. And yep, okay, so my hunch was completely correct. The properties being revealed are only the ones that already exist on the property, the notes themselves. And so this means that clearly I have some cleanup to do because some of these things like episode and stuff do not make any sense in terms of that. And it's funny because now that I see this, it's making me think this is, I got some ideas for other things, but anyhow. Okay, so a couple of things. So inside of here, you'll see that also that inside of the properties, you can actually change how it's being displayed. So if I don't love file name, I can just be like, I can just call it recipes. And so there you go. So these are all the recipes that are coming down here. And then the created time in this particular case, I can just be like created on, for example. And so it gives you basically this ability to create display aliases and labels for your different tables and rows in a way that makes sense for you. Now, the other thing that I want to call upon here is that there is this concept of a formula. And so formulas really are going to be a thing that we're going to need to deep dive in probably honestly a different session because I want to cover more of the practical things. But essentially know that similar to Notion, there is a way for you to actually go inside and start doing computations in a way that like allows you to do some dynamic things, which is kind of cool. And we will deal with more of that in the future. In the meantime, though, I am looking for a feature that I'm actually kind of surprised. Let's see, how do I do this? That's what I was looking for. Okay, perfect. All right, so a hidden functionality, to say the least, because it's not immediately obvious, is that if you'll notice here, if we go ahead and right-click on a particular column, you're going to notice this functionality inside of here called Summarize. And this one, I wonder if there's a better way for them to surface it, because again, I think unless you actually are looking for it or aware of it, it just kind of disappears. It allows you to actually go ahead and do some basic, some of those formula calculations I mentioned without any additional work. And so you can see here that if we're looking at how many are empty, it's already doing some of that math. And so, for example, how many are filled, which one was the latest one, which you can see is right here, the range. And so actually, if we look at the range, actually, this will actually demonstrate to you here the possibility of formulas within the bases. And then you can see here values.latest minus values.earliest. And these are things you could come inside and change, to be clear, to be totally honest. But what you have inside of here is that these are essentially these, how do I say this? They're like common functions you would be actually looking to use within the context of a lot of data. And so another instance of this, to be honest, is I had this, I was trying to do like a charging, I had like an anchor dashboard, like a gear. How did I do this? Anchor base. Yeah. So I had this like anchor gadget when I was doing some playing around with. Here are like some of the anchor devices that I've used in the past or currently own. And so you can see here that I can go ahead and come inside of here. I only have one of these. I have one of these. And then how many do I have? I have one of these, one of these. And so you can see here, oh, I did not expect that to happen. when I scrolled, it actually changed the input. So it clearly made it a number 1, 1. Okay. And so we can see here that now if we look at quantity, we can actually look at summarize, for example, and you can say, hey, look, I contain what's like the sum? I contain a total of 9 devices that are branded by Anchor. You can even see things like here, how many are filled, the average number. I mean, I guess not particularly useful in this particular scenario, but you can see here that like it's done this thing where it's like, oh, how many of them? Well, actually, it's kind of interesting. I wonder how they got the unique value, because there's values.unique.length, but to me, I have a bunch of different items, so I'm not sure how that unique one totally works. But yeah, but the summary thing is actually it's a very interesting concept, because here we can see, actually, so if I just go back to here and summarize, we can even say like, okay, what's like average, for example, and it'll actually go ahead and tell you the average of the different. And so in this particular case, I've already grouped my Anchor gadgets, and so it's like, oh yeah, on average I own 1 in this category, 1, 2. I mean, this math is not particularly interesting because I haven't really fleshed this part out. But it's just nice to know that, similar to Notion, where a lot of times when you'd be doing a table of things, you'd be like, oh, okay, what's exactly the sum going on? And it's like, oh, I already know all this, so the sum actually is right here. And that's how many we have. So it's like 2 here, 2 here, 2 here, 3 here. So that's how we get this total category. Now, to be clear, one of the things I will say, though, that is not as intuitive when I first started using this is that, at least at this point, if I wanted to know the sum of this, Notion did a good job of this, where the kind of summary of data would appear at the bottom, as you would sort of expect in a spreadsheet. So imagine here, right? I love this 1, 1, 1. There's 3 here, which is great. And then 1, 1, 1, 3 here, great. 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2. And then I would think oh wait, actually, as I say that, clearly I just realized my bottom bar is actually hiding some stuff. And so we can see here that actually it looks like I could, although I say this, but now I think about it, it's hidden by my bottom bar. So hold on. Can I bar? All right, I'm going to hack this real quick, because I think actually I may have hurt myself with this status bar. I'm going to delete that real quick. Ha! Oh, I knew something was fun. I should have. This is why you got to trust your instinct sometimes. Yeah, I need to figure out what's going on. So, well, we can actually hear. So, yes, of course, the team. Again, I was about to be quite surprised in the event that the team had not done this. Is that you can see the sum broken down here by category. So here we can see sum. And then here is where you get your final number, that you have the sum of 9 different items. So that's exactly what I expect. And it's making me wonder whether or not I need to rethink through the status bar, and if this is a design thing or just like a little bug that they have. But anyhow. Okay, so cool. That covers basically all the different things that I want to mention as far as like the essentials of Bases when it comes to sort property, filter properties, and then, this in case this wasn't obvious from the beginning, there is also the ability to search within a particular category. So in this particular case, if I wanted to find, like, I don't know, all the salmon recipes I have, here we go. I just type salmon, as you would expect. It already has searching functionality, and it is scraping, I want to say, just the title. And so we're going to test this real quick, because inside of my protein shake, I'm going to go ahead and add the word salmon inside the ingredients, just to like see if I can if it actually works the way I expect. And so now I'm going to go ahead and we're going to do salmon this time again. And this time, yeah, so I was correct. It is basically doing a filter on just the string inside, the label directly on the recipe or in the notes in this particular case, rather than scraping what is inside the body, which is totally fine. Again, it might be nice maybe to think about, like, oh, I want to be able to like see what ingredients I have and like maybe sort by ingredients so I can look at the recipes. That's something worth considering. But then this is where, like I said, the Obsidian Bases ends up being a nice tool for software developers to kind of play with how data is organized and how it might be queried, different views it has, and maybe the ways different things might need to be broken out. So in this particular instance, in the event I wanted to start being able to query like things that have the ingredient of recipe, then it's like a question of like, okay, is this one of those things where like I need to tag all the properties to say that these are the ingredients that are inside of it? I don't know. It would get a little bit hairy as far as that goes, I think, in terms of figuring that out. But anyhow, okay, so the search And then the fifth and final property now that I mentioned it is that anytime you create a new note within this particular context, and we'll call this like monkey bread, for example, you'll see here that monkey bread is automatically added not only within this particular base, which you would expect because again, you're creating a new one, but it automatically comes with all the filters that are already pre-built into it. And so in this particular case, you can see your type recipe. That is essentially what's going on. The only thing, though, that you're probably thinking of in this particular case, though, or at least some of you maybe, is that it means that, for example, I do have a recipe page at this point. It's a little outdated, but I do have a basic recipe page template. And so how would we actually get it to register in that regard? And so if you haven't done it already, I believe, so in this case, if I do monkey bread v2, and this time I give it the, like this recipe, and let's see if it actually follows it. Then I open it. Yeah, so that doesn't do it. So this is kind of interesting. So what's happening here is that it's circumventing. So again, to show you what I mean, if I do right now, if I create monkey bed v3 and I make it a recipe, you're going to notice that, base note page template. Oh, I did not create that. Hold up. Okay, we gotta do this though. If we're gonna test this theory out. Hold on, I don't want to make a claim that's not true if I don't have it. So we're gonna do that real quick. So I'm gonna come inside here. We're gonna do recipe notes. We're gonna say that if the titles includes the recipe parentheses, we'll then go ahead and add the recipe page template as we'll integrate that directly in, which is great. Okay, that's my base note. So let's try this again one more time. Monkey bread v4 recipe like this. Open up. Okay, great. So you see here my page template now has automatically populated. This is great. That's what you would expect. However, we talked about this. What we want to do instead is be able to do it directly from here. So if I did it like this, see, I think my theory is right. Monkey bread v5 recipe, for example, like this. And we open it up. You know, see, yeah, it's already done. And so the reason for this is, if you couldn't tell immediately, is that when you hit the new button, what the Obsidian Bases is doing is that it's actually creating a new note before you even name anything. And so the tricky part about it, and then not only, so sorry, what it's doing to finish that thought, it's creating a brand new note, basically an untitled note. And then it applies the filters that we already have, because it says that, okay, in order for this note to exist within this particular view inside of the Obsidian Bases, it needs to have these particular properties. And actually, now that I think about it, the interesting thing, though, is that I think this means that if we look at my files here, it's my assets, Excel. Oh, it looks like, all right, good. So it did not create it in the root directory. It just most likely just created my Zettelkasten, which is fine. Sorry. Okay. So yeah, so it created the note, and then, but after that, when you're renaming it, so when I went through that process of coming up here and being like, oh, okay, monkey bread v5, like in this case v6, the problem is that the note is already created. So in other words, you don't have a way for the templater plugin to go ahead and intercede and inject the appropriate template inside of it. So that is a constraint. Again, or at least it introduces a little bit of friction. To be clear, again, to people who are like, okay, well, okay, let's say that's the case. What do? I would just open the note, and then I would use the insert template. And so, let me see. So sorry, I have a shortcut for that, but I call it, there's like an insert template modal that I have. And so I do Command-Shift-I, and that allows me to then say, hey, insert like my recipe page template, and then I still have it. And so that way you get the ability then to, show the recipe and populate it accordingly. Knowing that, yeah, okay. Let me take a drink. All right. Okay. So those are like the main 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 main 5 functionalities of working with Obsidian Bases on a particular view. Now, the other thing, though, is now we're going to talk about views. And so it's funny, as a Vue core team and working with Vue, we're talking about Vue, the VIEW, the standard like database views. That's what we're talking about. And so when we're looking at this, what you can do actually is that you can essentially start to customize what it is and how the data is being formatted. That's really what we're talking about here. So in this particular case, I'm going to say like recipes by meals. And it's a table layout, and let's say you can make it taller, right? You can say medium, you can make it extra tall if you really wanted so. But in my case, short works totally fine. And so here we can see that now I have this view that's saved within Obsidian Bases, but I can also add a new view. So in this case, if I add a new one, I can then call this one, let's call this one, we'll call this category, recipe category. So we had created that earlier. Granted, it didn't totally work out, but it's fine. And this time though, we're gonna look a little bit at layouts, and layouts changes things a bit because it lets us expose 3 different views that are essentially being used. And so typically the 2 that most people are aware of are list and table. So you can see here's our list view. And the other thing too is that within the list view, you'll see here that we can actually change the bulleted list to see how many it is, which is super nice. Then without even thinking about it, can be like, oh yeah, cool. I got 40 items inside of here. Got a little list for me. And then, so you can change the markers to whatever you want. And then I'm not sure what they mean by indent properties. I don't see that. But indent properties versus property separator. I see. So there must be something about this that I'll have to look into later. But okay, so that's that. So we have this. And so so we have the ability to see here, we have a list, and then we have a table right here. And then the other thing too, though, is that I can go ahead and I can duplicate a view. And in this particular case, I'm going to call this cards. And this is where this is pretty cool now, is that Obsidian Bases now has the ability to also display things in a way that's much more visually appealing. For a lot of people, especially when they're starting to explore bases for things like tracking the books they're reading, shows they're watching, that kind of stuff. And it gives you this whole option. And so you're probably thinking like, okay, but like this kind of looks like my recipe meals, but just, just cards, right? But so what's like the cool thing about it? Well, one of the things that I did not mention up until this point is that you actually have the ability to actually render images natively now inside of Obsidian Bases. And so I don't know if that was always from launch, so I won't go that far. But let's say in this particular case, this is an Asian salmon recipe. And so, you know what? Actually, though, I do actually, let me see. Hold on a sec. Yeah, so let me grab this real quick. Give me one moment. All right. So, for example, inside my Korean bean sprouts recipe, because this is one of my favorite things to make, I'm going to go ahead and just add in meals, and I'm just going to call them side dishes. I'm not even call it a snack. And then inside of here, right? So typically what I would do when it comes to managing a recipe is that I'd be like, okay, well, I kind of want a picture of it. And so like, I guess I'll just like throw it in here. And so here's like the recipe. And so I don't want a random number. So let me go ahead and rename this Korean bean sprouts. And then this one, I'll be like, okay, this is kind of huge. Let me modify this to like a width of 250 and like, okay, that like kind of works. Like I made Korean bean sprouts. This is what it looks like. And like, it feels a little bit like a recipe, but at the same time, the problem with this is that even though when you're reading this, right? So even if I collapse all this looks more like a standard recipe app, right? You come in, you see like the picture of what you're making, and then you have like the things you want to use in order to make it. And so the question though, of course, is that, well, inside of this dashboard here, I see this Korean bean sprouts, but I would also love it to also render the thing. And so what you can do, instead is that, so let me unfold this again, is that in the event, so you can basically add a property. So say like in this case, I'm going to call it image. And then I can go ahead and actually include like a URL, or in this particular case, I'm just including a link to the direct image that I have inside of my vault. And so there are Korean bean sprouts like this. And then what we could do is inside of our properties, we can actually go ahead and hit image like this. And you'll see here that it's going to go ahead and display it via image. And then what you can do, okay, so there you go. That's the image, right? And you're like, okay, well, that's not interesting. What else could you do? Well, there's this thing called the thumb. We're going to call this property thumbnail. And there's this property not property, a function called image, which then allows you to then call the property. Well, I called it image at the time, and that should do the trick. Oh, why is it so small? Okay, hold up. Yep. And then, yep. But why? Sort, yes. Okay, this leaves a little bit left to the imagination, although I wanted to reorder the properties, but it's clearly not allowing me to. So if I go image, thumbnail, property, like this. So this is a user. You'll see that the thumbnail is appearing, funnily enough. It is inside, but I wonder if it's because I constrained it down. That doesn't make any sense. About to find out. No, that didn't do anything. So it must mean, actually, if I go inside of here, recipe meals, I'm trying to remember where the property was. I don't want that. I want the cards. Card size. Yep, so this allows me to modify that, which is fine. Image property. Yeah, okay. Oh, there we go. Thumbnail. Yeah, that's what I was looking for. Great. Okay, so I was mistaken. You don't need to put it here. Although it's funny, now that I think about it, if I go inside of here and then inside of my cards, instead of thumbnail, I believe I can actually just do the image property and then it's fine. And I actually didn't need that whole function. But it was a little display of what that could do. And then we have the card. And then we can actually change the property to be cover or contain. In this case, I'm just going to do cover. I think that's nice. And then we can change the aspect ratio. I think 1 is fine for now. We can leave it at that. And so now you have this ability to actually then like create what ultimately is a more visually aesthetic way of actually looking at your different notes in a way that's like, oh, cool. Like, and again, like this would be, again, I think these cards would get kind of big over time. But, you know, you have all the different things. You don't even have to look for things just by the text anymore. You just see what it is you're looking for and associate images with it over time. And that, to me, I think is one of the big unlocks with Obsidian Bases as well. Because on top of all the lovely user experience things you get when it comes to sorting data and all that stuff, you now have the ability to also play around a bit more with how you want things to be displayed. And again, this is entirely within the core plugin. I haven't done any CSS modifications or anything to it. You basically get the ability to like have these cards display images and it works. So yeah. And then again, I think the one thing I am thinking about as I'm saying this though, is that I'm wondering, yeah, I do wish this would be like a feature request. So similarly here, like if I create like if I toggle these two properties on, I would like the ability, similar to my sort functionality, I would want the ability to actually reorder the properties so I can change how it's being displayed on the card. And then, you know, even possibly, honestly, some basic styling controls. So whether it's like text size, that would be nice because, for example, the biggest thing I really need from recipes in this particular case, the title is just the name. And then the created on, in the case I even want to know when it was created, I would want it just like as a small footnote, as like almost like a decorative piece, but like still informative. And so in case you're wondering though, for example, another use case for formulas in this particular case would be like, if I just wanted to call it like card label, for example, I should be able to, again, I'm winging this particular thing, but I do think this is helpful, is I wanted to be able to like, let's see, what functions exist? I want to say like, file dot toString, sure. Oh, how about title? Name? All right, name. What do you got? Nothing? File dot name. Nope. Okay, file dot name dot trim. I don't want trim. I want to split. And I want to split it based on the recipe here. Like this. And then, oh, one more thing. Yep. And then there you go. And then so now that I have a card label, right, I've created it. I did a split here on the property. Now I can just take that off and then just do the card label, create it on like that. And now like the recipe parentheses I was using is just completely gone. It's just the label is done. And so that requires a little bit more finagling, but it's just nice to know that that's all possible now. And so Jacob here in the chat, I feel like I've done a bunch with dates when functions first came out. Yeah, there's a whole thing. That's a whole thing I haven't even done. I think we could do that. Actually, it's funny. Will be like age of the property. So I think we could do like now. So the now functionality minus created. I don't think f create file dot C time. That's what it is. Okay, like that. That was easy. So yeah, so you can see here, we can see that, hey, look, apparently I created this 3 years ago. I mean, the math could use a little finagling. I'm sure, I don't know exactly how that formula is working at the moment. But you can see here, we're taking just the now file.c time. They're probably doing some rounding that we're not necessarily aware of. And if I really wanted to, I'd have to dive into it if I wanted to be like down to the month, down to the day, that kind of stuff. But it's kind of neat that you can come in here and be like, hey, look, this is 2 years old. You know, this is 14 minutes, 15 minutes. Apparently, oh, yeah, this is how old it is. And so it's funny because then you could actually even theoretically, like we could group it by its age now. So you can see here that, oh, these are 2-month-old recipes. Although it's funny, it clearly knows the difference that it's not just 2 months and they're like even the 2 years is not really 2 years. And so there's clearly some granularity thing happening. I was hoping it would be a little bit dumber is the wrong word. It's just like a little bit more generic since it had like rounded it, that it would actually be able to just be like, yeah, 2 months is 2 months, and then just group all the 2 months together. And so clearly some rounding needs to happen in order to make that a bit cleaner. But yeah, that's one of the fun things that it just makes it basically brings in a lot of the functionality from Notion databases that a lot of us got used to or that really loved, and in a way that lets us really play around with it a bit inside of Obsidian. And so to be clear, also, let me see, filter, group by, I don't want that anymore. So now I'm just going to go back to the meals like that. Yeah. And then, yeah. Okay, cool. And, oh, Jacob here mentioning I have a last cook date on my recipes. That way I can see which I haven't had in a long time. That's a great one. One of the things I've been always wanting to test is that, as far as Obsidian notes, is the ability to like, in my daily note to actually say that, hey, I prepped this thing. And so by tagging it inside of a pure, like what I call like or what some of the community calls periodic notes, that would automatically get computed as the last cooked date. Cause then rather than something I have to update manually. And so I imagine that's gotta be possible given if we could do a query on all the linked notes to it and then filter it down by periodic notes or timeline notes. And then from there, just query the latest one. And that should be possible. Granted, I will not explore that. That might be a little rabbit hole, or might be something worth like using AI to use a little bit of scaffolding at first, just to kind of dig into the docs so that we're not spinning our wheels as much. But yeah, so, okay. So I think that is almost the last bit. I think I have one final thing I did want to share about the bases, and that is the fact that I mentioned earlier that bases are technically not markdown files. And so you might be thinking like, oh, this breaks the whole Obsidian philosophy, right? Because it's about like owning your own files in a local way that's like not proprietary. Well, I got you covered on that. So if I go ahead and open this, I'm going to open it in text edit because that's how much I want to prove my point here. No co-editors, no nothing. This is all a base really is. Yes, it's not .md. It is .base, I think partially for querying reasons so that it's easier for programmatically speaking to be like, hey, look, what are all the files that are bases? Because you can imagine if it's really just a markdown file, and let's say that Obsidian creates this property called like markdown type, and then there's a property called markdown type base, it would have to literally query every single markdown file and then check whether or not it's a base. And that is expensive computationally speaking. And so instead, it's just much easier to say, hey, look, there's this extension called .base. But if you look carefully at what actually is underneath the bases, this looks like YAML. And so in case you're wondering, what do you mean by YAML? Let's go back to Obsidian real quick. I'm going to bring this over here. Let me open my Korean bean sprout recipe, and let's actually open the raw view. it's actually the same exact thing that's powering your front node properties or front matter properties inside of Obsidian. And so what's really nice about this, honestly, is that one, like, yes, let's be clear. Is this proprietary? I guess you could call it that, in the sense that Obsidian has created a rendering engine, a parser that allows you to ingest this schema of properties from YAML. Again, YAML is the way this is formatted, by the way, in case people aren't as familiar with the programmatic term. Yes, it's allowing to do all that work so that you can display it inside of Obsidian. However, the reason I'm not quite, I think the proprietary argument is not as strong is for the mere reason that this here is written in a way that's actually meant to be as plain English as humanly possible, in the sense that in the event in the future, for whatever reason, Obsidian disappears, it no longer works, Obsidian Bases is gone, you can come in here and say, okay, there was this base that I really loved. It had this really great view, and I want to be able to recreate that. Well, you can actually take a look and say, okay, these are all the properties that I cared about that basically made it possible to show my data in the way that it was displayed. So that I know that, oh yeah, I called it recipe by meals, and that it was grouped by these particular things, ordered in this particular way, and sorted in this particular way, and I called it these things. And like, so to me, this is, yes, again, you could theoretically call it proprietary, but what I love about this is that Obsidian continues to maintain its, essentially, you own the process, you own the data, and you have a really transparent view into what's happening underneath, so that you can make changes as needed. So for example, I can say create it on this date, for example, like this, and if I save it and I come over here, inside of here, you're gonna notice that if I go inside the table, I believe, because I think that's what I just changed, you'll see that I just changed it inside of my plain text editor, and it updated, the render was updated correctly on Obsidian. So to kind of like connect all these things, so Obsidian Bases, again, is what we have as Obsidian's answers to Notion databases. And for those who haven't used Notion databases, it's basically just a really cool way to allow you to organize your notes in a way that, and sort through your notes in a way that makes it easier to understand, find things, and just to view things, honestly, rather than just like the notes themselves. And it's a really powerful enhancement to Obsidian. And so right before we kind of enter sort of like the closing thoughts of this particular live stream, one of the things I showed you is that everything underneath the bases is being powered by YAML, which is a way to format basically like structured data. And the key thing with that is that it's all plain text. Like yes, there are some like certain terms they use in order to execute certain things, but for the most part, it's declarative English. You can understand it. And more importantly, especially in the AI age that we're in, it means that you can allow your agents, for those who are working in environments where it's like okay to share this kind of stuff with their particular agent, they're not doing anything proprietary. It means that the agents can actually interact directly with the basis format and then actually help to create some of them as well. So in the event you want to have it, organize some data a certain way to give you a starting point, so you're not creating everything from scratch, AI is able to do that because there's not much proprietary about it beyond like understanding how Obsidian defined certain ways that the bases worked, but otherwise it's fairly straightforward, and they can just, because it's just plain text, the agents actually have a pretty easy time working with it. And so I think at one point, I want to say that I had like I'm trying to think. So I was looking at like a social media post dashboard, for example. And so I had it come up with I had it basically play as an experiment kind of prior to this. I was like, okay, what would it look like if you were to create like an Obsidian base that allows you to go ahead and like track all the social media posts? And it came up with like its own ideas, and again, things that I'm going to throw out and stuff. But it's nice because then it just makes it that much easier to automate the process and tinker with it. And most importantly, once you get into a particular view, once again, with the Obsidian bases, you can just easily change up how things work and tinker with it just as you would, just like to your own liking, rather than feeling like you have to do a lot of programmatic stuff that feels like you're going to break things. They've done really a phenomenal job with the user interface, and certainly there's room for improvement as always. But even just again, the core plugin on its own, without any enhancement, any change from here, still an absolute phenomenal job by the team and incredibly useful. So That said, in terms of like where are we at now with the food management app? And so clearly it goes to show that like if your only goal is to go ahead and have recipes on your machine that has, local state, you can search for it, you can organize it, you can look through it. As far as that goes, honestly, Obsidian really takes it quite far. One could argue it without any additional coding needed, it's good enough. That said, part of Ben's open tabs is an opportunity for us to chance to play around, explore with, and deal with different technologies. And so what we're going to do is from here is that I'm going to go ahead and off stream, like when I'm working on my recipes, and I'm going to better categorize some stuff, add some different things. But then from there, since I want to do things where I can actually have other users access it, so whether it's determining like a publishing way or just like playing around with like a little CMS, working with AI in a way to build like other functionality that might be fun to explore, then this is where we're going to start kind of taking it to the next level with the food management app and start playing with that. And especially when it comes to like meal planners and that kind of thing, how would that work in conjunction with our recipes? Jacob earlier mentioned that, he wants to be able to like say like, oh, when was I last used? And so looking at maybe like heat maps, like there's a lot of fun things we could do when it comes to food management. So while from a recipe app management perspective, one could say again that Obsidian Bases really can cover a lot for people from the get-go. There is clearly a decent amount of setup and stuff that goes into it and the workflow. And so is there a way we could do a better job to make it even easier? And so that will be kind of the fun we'll get to explore over time. And then Jacob here, you've been dabbling with Cooklang. Okay, I want to say that kind of came across a little bit in my research, but now I'm going to have to look a bit more. But yeah, so again, fun things to explore on the stream. And yeah, I think that is a wrap for today in particular. And so, yes, thanks everyone for hopping on. Special shout out to Jacob and Dudeman for hopping in and chiming in with their comments. Always appreciate you having y'all live on stream. In the meantime, again, for those who are looking to catch the recap or if you're looking for past episodes, you can check all that out on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/BenCodeZen. But otherwise, yeah, it's been an absolute blast. And I will see you all next week on Wednesday at 12:30 Eastern. 12:30 p.m. Eastern to be specific. All right. Well, it's been fun hanging, and I'll catch you all on the internets. Bye.